Welcome to a free on-demand webinar presented by Michigan Alliance for Families. We partner with experts from across the state to offer live webinars to help answer the questions we encounter most frequently. Our webinars are recorded and archived for future viewing. Handouts for our webinars can be requested through our webpage, michiganallianceforfamilies.org/webinar. Remember to keep up with Michigan Alliance for Families on Facebook and be sure to check out our other videos on our YouTube channel. Follow-up questions to this webinar can be directed to us at info@michiganallianceforfamilies.org. Today's webinar topic is goals and objectives and progress monitoring, and our presenter is Kelly Orginski. Welcome, Kelly.
Hello, it's good to be here this afternoon. So today we're going to really dig into goals and objectives and progress monitoring. They really go together. For a long time we talked just about goals and objectives, and we really need to make sure when we're looking to have better outcomes for kids with disabilities that the progress monitoring part is part of that conversation. So when you're talking about goals and objectives, there is always the law, and the law is always a good place to start, although that's not always, doesn't always lead us to the right questions to have better outcomes. So there's certainly the big federal law, IDEA, Individual with Disability Act, and then there's the Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Education. These might be a place you go to look for some answers around goals and objectives or progress monitoring. I would certainly go to our website and you could look up IDEA or MARS or other questions. But sometimes the law is the place when you're hearing things in a conversation in an IEP that may or may not be law-based, or it might be the thing that changes the conversation if the conversation isn't going well. But certainly it's not the only thing. We'll talk about other ways to change the conversation to have better outcomes for kids with disabilities. So it all starts with your child's needs. What are the child's educational needs? And so IEPs are written to ensure success in a free and appropriate education in a least restrictive environment, and we do have a webinar for that. But it's around looking at how do we write this program to ensure a kid's success. And oftentimes there isn't really a conversation about what is that really. Sometimes conversations start around least restrictive environment in the middle or at the end of a continuum, so you really want to familiarize yourself with what does that mean. You also, the other question around when you're talking about really having better outcomes for kids with disabilities is what does it look like if your child is not successful? You know, where are the child's needs? What does this look like when they're not successful in reading or in math or in being able to compose themselves to stay in the classroom? So what are those needs? And I think sometimes it's a question that might lead to a better conversation that, yes, Kelly's doing really well with this, this, and this, but where is she not successful? Those would be where the needs would be identified. The purpose of an individual education program is around access to the general education curriculum, extracurricular, and non-academic activities. An IEP is written to ensure success and address the child's needs in all three of those areas. So it's a good thing. There is only one curriculum in the state of Michigan. You can be in 7th grade and read at a 2nd grade level. You can be 9th grade and do math at a 3rd grade level. The purpose of the curriculum is to give us a scope and sequence of the learning. There's no guessing. So if a child knows 1 and 2 digit addition, they learn 1 and 2 digit subtraction. And so it gives us the idea of what the kid is supposed to need next, where they're at. So, you know, if a child is in 7th grade and reading at a 2nd grade level, we're not going to be teaching them 7th grade reading and accessing the curriculum at 7th grade. We need to figure out where they are and build from there. There's also curriculum for physical education, music, art, computers, library science, Spanish, anything that has a curriculum. There is a scope and sequence to follow. And so it's important when you're having conversations, particularly around goals and objectives and progress monitoring, about where the child is now. And the curriculum might be the place to look, particularly when you're talking about academic achievement. Where is the child now? What do they know? Are there gaps in the learning? And how do we figure that out when we look at that? We'll talk more about baseline data. It's also an individual education program can also be written for those extracurricular and non-academic parts of a student's day. So it could be before or after school activities. A child might need support, accommodations and modifications for that, which would be found in your IEP. It might be around field trips, school assemblies, and probably the most often where we see behaviors due to disability that get in the way of learning is recess, lunch, and transportation to and from school. So certainly a student could be achieving within the curriculum, A's and B's, B's and C's, whatever that looks like, but they're disability, the behavior is due to their disability, gets in the way of their learning throughout the day. And certainly an IEP can be written to teach new skills around behavior, sitting still, handing your homework, taking turns, whatever that looks like. So this, I would ask you to print out, however you need to have this, write it down, whatever that looks like. This is the process of the IEP. And the IEP is a linear process. It starts with a PLAF statement. We're talking about goals and objectives today, accommodations and modifications, and support and service. If you have ever been in an IEP that went bad, quote unquote, it's because people have jumped this process. So frequently, parents want to talk about what are the supports and services first, and oftentimes teachers want to talk about goals and objectives because they're educators and want to talk about what the child needs to learn or has learned. If you've been in an IEP that seems to be going around in circles and you're not seeming to go anywhere, you need to take a break and look back at the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. That's where it all starts. If you have a poorly written PLAF statement, you're going to have a poor IEP that probably won't be able to be implemented. Therefore, a child will not be making progress. So really, this is what you really want to remember, that sometimes we want to start the conversation about having a iPad or a one-on-one aid or more speech therapy, or we want to talk about where the child, we want the child to learn 75 new sight words. Really, the conversation needs to go back to where is the child, and that will be found in the PLAF statement, present level of academic achievement and functional performance. So how do you know if you have a good PLAF statement? Yes, we do have a webinar for that, but if that's not where you are, this is how you, if you've pulled out your child's PLAF statement, their IEP, and you're looking at this, or you've got an IEP you're going to be going to in the next week or two, a PLAF statement needs to address these 5 questions. And so if you look at the PLAF statement and there are 3 of the 5 answered, you probably are on your way to a good PLAF statement. If you have a PLAF statement that doesn't answer any of these, or you can't find it within the PLAF statement, you need to go to somebody within the IEP team and ask them to please explain it to you, or ask them where that would be found. Depending on where you live, IEPs can be written differently, technologies differently in different places, and so you just want to keep this in mind. In the PLAF statement, it wants to talk about your child's strengths and weaknesses academically and functional performance. It's lovely to see that the child loves pizza and has many friends and is easy to get along with. But as a teacher, that doesn't help us build on what they know, to have better goals and objectives, to have kids have better outcomes. And so it's strengths and weaknesses of both academically and functional performance, which is how they do in the learning environment. So what are those strengths and weaknesses? What helps the child learn? And so is it around having concrete examples, or where they sit, or being able to have a written directions in front of them? What helps the child learn? And this is an excellent place for parents to participate and bring information to the table about how does it help when you've taught your child something new at home? What helps them be able to learn that new task? Is it around 10 repetitions? Is it around videotaping them so they can see themselves? Is it around a written list? What helps them learn? And so those types of things you'd want to see in there. Not everything that happens at home can happen at school, but certainly it's a place to build on from a parent's knowledge what helps that kid learn. What limits or interferes with the child's learning, and what you don't ever want to see here is either an educational label or a medical diagnosis, ASD, CI, EI. That is one label. It doesn't help us build instruction for a kid. If you've met one kid that has one label, you've met that kid. And so those are not helping with an individual education program. So you want to make sure that what limits or interferes the child's inability to sit still for, say, longer than 2 minutes, or child's reading at a 2nd grade level while in 7th grade curriculum. Those are the kinds of things that limits or interferes a child's learning. You want to see objective data from a current evaluation, I would say within the last year, and the objective data can come from a variety of sources. It could be, the big district tests or classroom tests, or it could just be data that's collected when the social worker sees the student. It needs to be on paper. You need to be able to see what this objective looks like, when it was collected, how it was done. It needs to be there for the team to be able to talk about where it looks like. So objective data, typically not more than a year old. Kids change a lot, and so you don't want to have data brought to the table that's 2 or 3 years old. You want to see within the PLAF statement how your child's disability affects his or her ability to be involved in and progress in the general education curriculum, the purpose of an individual education program. Again, this is a place where you don't want to see the child's medical or educational label here. You don't want to see cognitive impairment or emotional impairment or traumatic brain injury. That is merely a label that one either qualifies them for special education support or service or is a medical diagnosis that the medical establishment treats from. So you want to see what is it that affects them. It's their ability to process auditory information. Is it slow working memory? Is it low usage of their left side? You want to see specifically about what it is that affects his or her ability to be involved in. And so sometimes this is a hard part to write down because people want to just write the disability, but we're really talking about the disability effects around academic achievement and functional performance, and how does that come together. This is another great place for a team to really have a conversation about what the child's needs are. I think this question might most directly connect with what the child's needs are, because if we can talk about how their disability affects their ability to be involved in, we can really be very specific about what a child needs in the learning environment. So goals and objectives. It took me a long time to get a handle on goals and objectives, and I've been doing this in a while, so we are getting better at defining what does that look like. The annual goals and short-term objectives section of the IEP builds upon your child's present level of academic achievement and functional performance, that PLAF statement. The present level statement identifies what your child's needs are. Again, what are the child's educational needs? The goals and objectives should be written to address those needs. And so when you're getting ready for the IEP, being able to just write down what you think your child needs. You know, they need more friends. Well, what does that really mean? They need more friends. Is it around receptive and expressive language? Is it around being able to sit still longer? Is it around learning some social skills? The child, my child needs to be able to read at grade level. Well, what does that look like? From reading with your child at home or from reports that you've had from school, what does that look like? Is it around sight words or decoding or comprehension? So what do you notice at home when you're reading with your child or they're talking to you? And oftentimes then that can be transferred into and built upon what's in the PLAF statement to address those needs and goals and objectives. The goals and objectives also should be written in a way that everyone understands, and they go together, and so it's hard not to talk about one without the other. People always ask, are there samples of goals and objectives? Absolutely. If you got online, you could Google goals and objectives, and there are all kinds of samples out there. You only need to be aware, though, when you look at samples, they might not necessarily address the needs of that specific child based on the data in their PLAF statement. Sometimes when you look at things like that or you build on, it gives you that kind of base to build from there, or use some of that language to kind of tweak what the goals and objectives look like. But goals and objectives are part of an individual education program. So if you go to our website, if you go to the IEP place, IEP, and then you click on the Nietzsche document, a parent's guide to the Nietzsche document. On page 10 is the PLAF statement that we were just talking about. On page 12, as you see on the screen, it says Nietzsche page 12. And it really gives us an idea of how do we start writing really good goals and objectives. And there's two different ways to do this. I'm giving you, these are both tools that you could use, whichever one appeals to you. One is not better than the other. So just that you're aware that there's ways to start having conversations and start thinking about those goals and objectives in your IEP that you have or the one that's coming up. So you always want to talk about who. Goals and objectives must be written in a positive, forward-moving manner. So who will achieve? And some of this goal, who, it's an individual education plan, the student's name there. What happens sometimes is when people cut and paste goals and objectives, the child's name is Nathan, and when you get to the IEP it says Sam there. And then it doesn't seem very individual, and there really has to be a lot of conversation about what that looks like. And occasionally you run into where it says TSW, the student will. And so you really want to make sure that when we're talking about individual education program, we're talking specifically about this kid. What skill or behavior, skill as an academic skill, because I think behaviors are skills too, but what skill, academic skill or behavior does the child need to learn? What do they need to learn? So what exactly is it? They need to increase their reading a grade level. They need to be able to sit still for longer than 4 minutes. They need to be able to not put their hands on the student next to them 6 times in 3 minutes. Whatever that looks like, that the student will, what behavior or skill, we need to be able to define it, see it, touch it, define what that looks like, and it needs to be based in data, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The how is the part where I frequently think when we talk about goals and objectives that we have miscommunications when it comes to monitoring the progress. So in what manner or at what level? So is it, with prompts or without prompts? Is it with adults or is it with children? Is it in a small group or is it in a large group? Is it with the therapist? All those questions, at what manner or at what level is the skill or behavior we're looking for, and baseline data tells us that. But frequently when we talk about the how, there is an assumption when we don't have good baseline data and our PLAF isn't well written that you talk about that Kelly will engage in 3 to 4 reciprocal conversations on a topic of her choice. And if it is not well talked about and planned and written in the IEP, the speech therapist is thinking about one-on-one with them in the speech therapy room. The parents might be thinking about throughout the day in all environments that Kelly has that skill to be able to have those reciprocal conversations. And so you need to decide, you need to have a conversation about where Kelly is now, at what manner and at what level, and to where she needs to be and where we think she could be in a year, because IEPs are typically written for a year. Where and in what settings or what conditions, that's, with adults or with a therapist or a lunchroom, or what does that look like? And typically by what time? IEPs are typically written for a year usually, and so are we're looking at in a year Kelly will have this new skill or behavior. Another way to look at when you're thinking about goals and objectives is for them to be specific, and I know sometimes this is a hard conversation to have around specific, but if we can't be very specific, we can't teach Kelly a new skill. So it needs to be very specific. What new skill or behavior does she need to learn in order to access the general education curriculum, extracurricular, non-academic activities? What is it specifically her needs are? How is it being measured? And I think this is a conversation that we don't have in depth enough when we're talking with our IEP teams. How is it measured when you see 70% of the time or 5 out of 10 times, or sometimes IEPs have like a A/C, and you have to go down at the bottom and look at the grid that they have about how they're being measured. I think it's well worth an IEP's team's time to talk about really how is it being measured. Is it being measured every time the speech therapist sees it? Is it being measured every time the social worker is in the classroom? Is it how is this being measured? And I think this is a perfect time for an IEP team to really talk about, and parents to really bring up, what does that look like? I don't know what 70% of the time looks like. And then have a conversation about what that looks like. And does it go back to where the student is right now and able to build on that? Is it achievable? I think that's a really good question to ask an IEP team. Is what we're proposing, we understand where Kelly's needs are, and we're talking about where we want her to be. Is that achievable in 1 year, given how Kelly has learned up to this point? And obviously if you have someone under 5, we don't have a lot of data about how they learn and they're maturing and developing. If you have a 14 or 15-year-old, we're a little bit better about what helps and supports that. So is this achievable within a year? And if the question is, when you get to the point, is this achievable in a year, and an IEP team can't really answer it, you need to go back to the PLAF statement and the baseline data to figure out what that looks like. I have had lots of conversations, IEPs particularly around achievable, around executive functioning skills, and everyone, yes, we should always be working on executive functioning skills, kind of that higher level thinking, that problem solving, and what does that look like. But an example I can give you, it was an 8th grade boy, and his parents really wanted to write some goals and objectives around executive functioning skills, and the team was saying to them, not many 8th grade boys, 8th graders in general, have executive functioning skills. That's where they're being developed. And so where the parents wanted him was an excellent place to be, but it would take 2 to 3 years to be there. And so we needed to go back and say, yep, the ultimate goal is to have those executive function skills, but we really need to look where he is and build from there. So is it achievable? I think that we as IEP teams, as parents, and those who sit on IEP teams really need to be very clear about not setting the goals too high or too low, that we need to really think about, yep, this is where the kid is and this is what they're going to be able to achieve within a year. Results oriented, so at the end of the IEP, this is what the student's going to know, whether it's a behavior or a skill that we're really looking to see where that's a good question to ask. So you're saying at the end of this IEP that Kelly will be able to do two-digit addition and subtraction. Absolutely. So where is the ultimate outcome that we're building on? And timely, that it's done in a timely fashion, and IEPs kind of have their own time set to it, but we'll talk a little bit more about it. So either one of these tools will help you when you're looking at goals and objectives. You can use either one or both to help ask better questions so we can have better outcomes for kids with disabilities. So this is the place. This is where the rubber hits the road. Baseline data to provide a starting point for determining whether the child makes the expected improvement in the learning over a given period of time. So the baseline data that comes from the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. It says this is where Kelly is in reading. This is where Kelly is in her expressive language. This is where Kelly is around self-monitoring behavior. You need to have this baseline data, and if you don't have it, if you're in the IEP and people move right to goals and objectives, or we want to write about accommodations and modifications of supports and services, we need to go back and talk about the baseline data. I think Kelly should have speech and language 3 times a week. Where's the data that supports that? So I've been in conversations where the parents really wanted the child to have more speech therapy, and the conversation went back, so where is the baseline data? And this conversation happened to be that when they looked back at the gains the child had made around her goals and objectives, given speech twice a week, she achieved her goals and objectives last year with speech twice a week. And so there was really no data to show that they needed to increase it because she'd made the goals that were set in the year before. So the baseline data is really important. I've also had conversations with an IEP teams where nobody really wanted to find what the problem was the student was having. Spitting, being loud, whatever that looked like. Everybody agreed that, she needed to have social work service, and they were even saying seeing a social worker 3 times a week for a half hour. But when we looked back why, they had not stated what the child's needs were and where the baseline data was there. So it can go either way, and I think sometimes we need to make sure that we're really on the same page and being very succinct about what does the data show us the student's needs are. So how do you kind of put this together? And so the present level of academic achievement and functional performance is really around those students' needs and the baseline data. All of that should be in the PLAF statement. So sometimes PLAF statements are 2 pages long. Sometimes PLAF statements are written around area of need, the speech therapist, the physical therapist, the teacher. Sometimes PLAF statements are beautiful narratives. But within that, anybody in the IEP team should be able to pull out that baseline data and see what that looks like and be able to answer those questions. From the baseline data, we develop the goals. Where is it that we want Kelly to be in the next year? Now, certainly it could be in the next 3 months, it could be in the next 6 weeks, but where is the goal? Where do we want Kelly to improve, whether it's her behavior or a skill? And that's the objective. The thing to remember around objectives that helps me when I'm moving through this, the objective is what is it we want the student to learn? So there's the goal where we want the student to be, but the objective is what do we want the student to learn? And I think sometimes we get really not as specific as we should be around objectives when people talk about them. We want Kelly to learn we want Kelly to use her planner, and this is a famous one for 7th and 8th graders. We all agree that Kelly should use her planner because if she could write everything in her planner, she would be organized and she wouldn't miss her homework and she would know what to do and there'd be better communication between home and school. That's great. And so then sometimes you get, the objective is Kelly will use her planner. The goal is Kelly will be more organized. The objective is Kelly will use her planner. Well, what is it that Kelly needs to be able to do? What skill does she need in order to use her planner? And that is the question. And so you know, oftentimes in IEPs, we all shake our head and go, yep, yep, using the planner would be a great thing. But then we talk about what that skill is to use the planner, and there are skills to be specifically taught. Is it around being organized and making sure the planner's with them all the time? Is it being able to physically be able to open the planner or be able to write things? Is it around processing, being able to look up on the board and then write that motor planning into the planner? Is a written planner not what a student needs? Is there some kind of a checkbox or some kind of a technology that a student would need to be organized? So really, when you talk about what those objectives are, you need to be, it's around what the student's going to learn. So this is just an example of what might look like. As parents, as part of the IEP team, we certainly would not write goals and objectives. You certainly could find some that worked last year, some language to start on, some language that makes sense to you, and bring it to your IEP team and say, this makes sense to me. How can we make this work? How does this fit in? And so this is an example. It talks about baseline data. Tests show that she can read first grade books at a rate of 20 to 30 words per minute. That's the baseline data where Amanda is right now as a fourth grader. That's specific as it can get. An annual goal for Amanda, she will read second grade material at a rate of 60 to 80 words per minute with no more than 2 errors. So your first question might be, within the baseline data, that she's reading at a rate of 20 to 30 words per minute. Are we assuming that is with no errors or 0 to 2 errors? I might be asked that question. And so we're looking for this year, Amanda will read at a second grade level at 60 to 80 words a minute with no more than 2 errors. That is, we all understand where Amanda needs to be and how we need to, the instruction then follows it to make this goal a reality. So I like it when there is this conversation when we talk about progress monitoring and how do we monitor progress. By November 15th, Amanda will read first grade material at a rate of 60 to 80 words per minute with no more than 3 to 5 mistakes. And you would assume by reading this that within the PLAF statement that it talks about Amanda's mistake rate. And so you could refer back to that. By February 15th, Amanda will read first grade reading material at a rate of 80 to 100 words per minute with no more than 0 to 2 mistakes. By April 15th, Amanda will read second grade reading material at the rate of 40 to 60 words per minute with no more than 3 to 5 mistakes. And by June 15th, Amanda will read second grade material at a rate of 60 to 80 words per minute with no more than 0 to 2 mistakes. Amanda's teachers records Amanda's reading and error rates throughout the year in order to measure her progress. So sometimes I think as parents you look at that and we all go, this is great. Even as IEP teams, this is really great. And the question oftentimes that comes to my head is that, how does this happen? And so how this happens is by reading instruction from her teacher or her case coordinator, who's ever her reading specialist, that they are teaching Amanda these skills, that we are expecting to see progress on this, and this is very well written. I like by the dates, certainly as a IEP team member, as a team, you can decide however you're going to report out. Again, it could be 70% of the time, 3 to 5 times, it could be the grid at the bottom, but there needs to be an understanding of what that looks like, what the progress looks like. So you certainly could ask the team if they're saying 70% of the time or they're saying, 3 to 5 times, can you show me what that looks like? How would I expect to see that Amanda is making progress? And so this one way is by the dates. Another is by, you might think about the 60 to 80 or 80 to 100. So this is very specific, and I would say that as an IEP team and a parent part of the IEP team, that this is an important piece to do, that this looks at how progress is really happening. So you start wherever the kid is. Amanda's in 4th grade, reading at a 1st grade level. That's the baseline data. And due to their disability, reading is difficult for Amanda, and that's an okay thing. The purpose is to move Amanda forward for her to gain new skills. The level of, let me jump back there. Sometimes I have been in places where they talk about objectives being written at grade level. And I'm not sure where this comes from. And so if you're part of an IEP team that talks about progress being written, objectives being written out of grade level, particularly around curriculum objectives, I think we really need to stop and have that conversation. Because if Amanda was reading at grade level, she wouldn't need IEP objectives, she would be where she needs to be. And so I think it's sometimes a conversation that can be circular, and perhaps you need to bring in somebody to help clarify what that means. But objectives need to be written on the baseline data of that student. You're not writing objectives based on content grade level of where the student is. The disability interferes with their learning in some way, and so you need to start where the student is. So if you are having those conversations around objectives being written at grade level and the student is not, that's a really good conversation to have. So how is a student who's reading at a first grade level, if you're writing reading goals at fourth grade level, how is she going to get from first grade to fourth grade? So having those conversations about what are the steps to get there, and it would be lovely if a child could make a 3-year gain in 1 year, but usually due to kids' disabilities, it's not often a 3-year gain. You know, we're always hoping for a year gain in 1 year, but sometimes the disability is such that it's not always that quick. Level of attainment, that's always by the end of the IEP typically, but you know, IEPs can be written for 6 months, and so it might be level of attainment in the next 6 months. But typically, you know, they're written for that, you know, September till June. So the level of attainment, what does that look like? Is it 1 year and 1 year progress in 1 year, 6 months progress, year and a half? You want to be able to talk about what were Kelly's learning levels to this point, and then what will we expect her to have. And then the periodic reporting on progress that the student is making. And that is the part that I think all of us have a hard time really thinking, how do we do this? For myself, when my son was young, I would get his report card and his progress towards IEP goals, and it would be a checkbox that said expecting progress expecting rate. Progress and expecting rate. And I always thought that was good, but I never knew that you really should be talking about what does that really look like, because many years you'd get to the end of the year and he had not achieved his goals and objectives, and there was no real talk about why he hadn't, what happened, what was going on. So it could be progress, or there could be progressing at a rate not expected to achieve and making no progress. And all three of those are excellent questions to ask when you're talking about how are we going to measure this. So this is what you might want to see. You might want to ask your case coordinator or your speech therapist, or if you yourself are really good with data, to kind of plot out what it would look like for a student. The data you're being given in September, this is where they are with reading rate, or this is where they are to be able to sit still, or this is where they are with math, and be able to actually plot it out on a grid. It could be any number of ways, but this is what you kind of want to see, that steady progress they're expected to achieve. At this point on this grid, it was talking about at over 90% we would want the objective to be achieved. Sometimes it could be at 60%. If the objective was the students' baseline data said they were at 30%, at the end of the year we would want them at 60%. We're not necessarily expecting them to go from 30 to, say, 90%. For some goals and objectives, 90% isn't where they would want to be. So it's really a conversation about what does that achievement look like. This might be a place, as you get data reports and you're collecting the data around progress monitoring, that a student isn't achieving at expected rate to achieve. So we're going to assume that 90% was the achievement, and where the student is right now, they only made it to about 60%. Well, why aren't they achieving at expected rate? Is it that, you know, is there medical change with the student? Is there a difference in teachers? Has the therapist changed? Why aren't they progressing at the expected rate? And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but what it's really good is to have a conversation is why aren't they? What's going on? Is the instruction not right? Is the time of day? Last year Kelly had math in the morning and she did great, and now she has it last thing at the end of the day, and we're not seeing her progress the rate she did before. This is really a good conversation, but what we don't want it to happen is we don't want to wait till June to have it. And so that's why it's so important to have that periodic progress, and that we're all able to talk about specifically where Kelly is right now. And the last is the data might show within progress monitoring that the student isn't making progress in that, and that she had a little bit of a blip up there in February, but then the data shows that the skill or objective would dip down again. Well, why is that? You know, why isn't she making progress? Did we not have good baseline data? Did we not have any baseline data at all? You know, we just jumped in and thought we were going to start from here. What's going on? So why didn't the student make progress? And again, you could go back through your old IEPs and kind of monitor the progress and see where that student is and be able to take that into an IEP team or have the IEP team do it in a meeting to talk about really where does the data show where the student is and where they're going. And so again, not a bad thing if the student isn't making progress, but you don't want that to happen in June because then you're all saying, well, why not? You know, and I think sometimes when we don't have well-written class statements with good goals and objectives, you know, people always want to fall back on, well, the child has fill-in-the-blank disability. Well, the purpose of an individual education program is to access and make progress in the general education curricular, non-academics, and extracurriculars. And so the disability isn't a fallback. The disability is what may cause learning in an individual education support and service, but what is it that we need to do for the student to learn that skill? So when you're thinking about how do we write good goals and objectives, it's all based on the student's needs, which should be well documented in the class statement. Well, wonder if I don't have it well documented in the class statement. That's a great opportunity to go back and talk about. So we don't really know when Kelly's behavior is happening. We all agree that she's been spitting, bad behavior. You don't make friends spitting. You know, so when is she spitting, and how often, and with who? And so when are where are the student's needs? Then we agree Kelly is really struggling in reading. Well, what does that look like? How often? When does that happen? And so once you have a well-written class statement that clearly identifies all areas of the student's needs, then you write those goals and objectives. And that's the skill or behavior we want the student to learn in 1 year. What is the skill or behavior we want them to learn? Because I need the skill or behavior in order to access the general education curriculum, non-academics, and extracurriculars. So what are we going to teach them? What are they going to learn this next year? And most importantly, when you talk about goals and objectives, is around that progress monitoring. How are we going to make sure how and what we're teaching Kelly, she is learning and making progress to continue to move forward within her education? So it's around, you know, having that baseline data and then the level of attainment and then that periodic reports and what does that look like? How often? How is it being reported? To who? All those pieces need to be talked about. It is really all about students having better outcomes. And so this is a critical piece about students learning skills to have better outcomes and that we can continue to build on how they learn and what they learn so they can be more successful in school.
Thank you, Kelly. Michigan Alliance for Families is an IDEA grant-funded initiative of the Michigan Department of Education, Office of Special Education, and Michigan's Federal Parent Training and Information Center, funded by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs. Follow-up questions to this webinar can be directed to us at info@michiganallianceforfamilies.org.